Hi, and welcome back to the second hour of Focal Point on AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name, congenial, convivial, and amiable as always. Honored and pleased to welcome to our decision maker line Dr. Gina Loudon. Gina has been a frequent guest, an honored guest on this program. She is a talk show host in her own right, one of the founders, really, of the Tea Party movement, and someone who has an extensive background in journalism, writes for WND.com, formerly WorldNet Daily, and wrote an explosive column today that I wanted to bring her on to chat with about. Gina, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
It's an honor to be with you, Brian. I appreciate it. And I'm really a horrible decision maker, so I love that label. I'm going to claim it right now.
All right. Well, you're welcome to it, and you are entitled to it. And Gina, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be on your program, just a couple hours ago. So thank you for returning the favor. And what I wanted to talk with you about is a column that you had on WND.com this morning. I guess you posted it last night, but it's about a memo from Air Force Command to airmen in the Air Force. This is a memo from the 624th Operations Center. Under remarks, it says this is for widest distribution. So talk to us about the content of this memo, Gina, and why it ought to be of concern to us.
Well, this was brought to my attention from a patriot that I know from St. Louis, Missouri, Cindy McGee. She's the mother of an airman, and she let me know that her son had received this. She did not want him, to get in trouble for this, of course, so she wanted to withhold his name. But she is outraged, she said, because our government is trying to censor our service members from the truth of what is happening here at home when they are put in the position of being in harm's way to defend the very rights that they're not even entitled to here. So this is quite discouraging. She was very angry about this and wanted me to know and asked if I would do a story. Yes.
All right, Gina. Well, tell us what the Air Force is trying to do to these airmen to keep them from getting information that you and I have and are talking about right now.
Well, basically, they didn't want, the airmen were told specifically by their superiors that they were not allowed to read news stories about the Obama scandal, the NSA scandal, I believe in particular, but really in general that they shouldn't be on the Internet looking up scandals about the president. And basically my understanding is they were threatened very specifically that something was said along the lines, perhaps this was verbal, but something was said along the lines of, come on, don't put all the work you've done in your career in jeopardy by Googling Obama scandal. And when you listen to that and you think, okay, well, so there may be a policy that it's not good in general for maybe the computers, I guess, that they have access to be used to sit around all day long and Google scandals about the president that they're supposed to be their commander-in-chief. And that we understand. I think what's most concerning, and whether or not you agree with that policy, and I happen not to, but whether or not you agree with that policy, if it's an across-the-board policy, Brian, that's one thing. The fact that there was a reprimand and a reminder of sorts based upon Obama scandals in particular, I think is what has to have us concerned. And this smacks the same, Brian, as all of these other scandals where, they're saying, oh, but this didn't come from Obama, this comes from military superiors. Really? Well, all of these different agencies and their exertion of power over those who they are supposed to be serving, it just causes one to pause and say, wait, so we're censoring? Because this is the most base definition of censorship. We're censoring now those that we're asking to defend our freedoms. You really got me there.
Well, and this is of a piece with other stories that we've been reading about just recently. I'm looking at a story here by a column by Todd Starnes about a soldier who was told by his superiors not to read books by Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, or David Limbaugh while he was in uniform, that it was going to be disruptive to unit cohesion and all that. And the thing is, this is of a piece. They don't want him reading Mark Levin, don't want him reading David Limbaugh, don't want him reading Sean Hannity. You assume that if he was reading The Audacity of Hope, that would be absolutely just fine. He would think that would be just wonderful, even though that would be objectionable to other people in the unit. And, it struck me, well, what you ought to do is just tell these people to go get dust jacket for Audacity of Hope and wrap it around everything you read. Put your Bible inside it. They'll love you for it. They'll commend you, get a promotion, because that's what they'll think that you are reading. But, you know, the thing that struck me here, Gina, and here's the explanation. I'm looking at the memo. You included it in your column. And it says here, here's the explanation that's given. Classified documents associated with a news story on NSA and wiretapping, so that's specifically the kind of news stories they're talking about, are potentially classified and readily available on the Internet. Users are not to use Air Force systems, access the Verizon phone records collection, and other related stories, because the action could constitute a classified message incident, which means they're saying, look, if you, and the limitation is even on viewing these stories. It's not just downloading them or forwarding them or printing them off, but even looking at them. And they specifically mentioned the Guardian website, which is the website in the UK that broke this story about this NSA domestic surveillance, had to be broken by a news outlet in the UK. Right. And so they're saying, look, if you even look at a story on the Guardian on this topic, you could be guilty of a classified message incident, which would mean you'd be accused basically of violating the information, and you could spend the rest of your life in a military prison somewhere. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me.
This is no small threat, and we shouldn't really be surprised when you just look down the list of other agencies with orders coming from on high, I should say. This shouldn't really even surprise us. This is just another chapter in the book of the Obama administration and his cronies. And there was a really interesting, and I pointed to this in my opinion piece I did for WorldNet Daily on Sunday. There was a really interesting monologue by Rush Limbaugh over the weekend. And, you know, talk show hosts don't tend to cite other talk show hosts, you know, especially Rush Limbaugh, because we want to do our own work. But this was so compelling that I really, really wanted to bring it to the attention. And he cites Herb Meyer in his post, and he talks about how you know, the folks underneath Hitler, Herb Meyer makes the point, specifically of Hitler's. All his underlings had to do is listen to what Hitler was saying. All they had to do was know what his objectives were. And he says the same thing is happening here with this administration. There may not be the specific fingerprints of tyranny by the president on each of these incidents, but now, don't you think, Brian, there are so many of them, it's impossible that they don't point to the very top. And he's careful to say that he's not calling the administration a bunch of Nazis, but he's just making the point that you don't have to have the direct link from Obama to these things. He hired these people. And that's the consistency when tyranny is put into place, that the fingerprints of the person in charge are very carefully omitted from these sorts of things. But they hired these people. The buck stops there, and heads need to roll on this one.
Well, and that's why I've just taken to referring to this whole complex of scandals simply as ObamaGate. Because, again, like you're saying, Gina, the media is trying to build these firewalls around Obama. But you look at, we got IRS involvement, that's a federal agency. You got the DOJ involvement, that's a federal agency. NSA, federal agency. State Department, another federal agency. What do all of these agencies have in common, and the personnel that run these agencies, what do they all have in common? It's Barack Obama. I mean, like you were saying, Jeannie, he's the one that picked them. He's the one that nominated. He's the one that put them in place. And there's no way they would be doing these kind of things unless they either had the tacit or explicit approval of the guy at the top.
That's exactly right. You know, we can blame Eric Holder. We can look to the different department heads. We can blame some poor sap so-called Republican, who I guess is now the latest target in the IRS scandal, whatever. We can blame different people, but there's one thing that every single one of these agencies has in common. The guy who is supposed to be in charge from the get-go of all of these agencies. And you look at scandal after scandal, uncountable, Brian, as you pointed out at this point. I can't even name them all at this point. I've lost track virtually. And that tells you that there is something very much awry in and the power this government thinks it has to exert itself over the people that are supposed to be free people with the Constitution. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and that exactly happens to me. I'll try to be listing off these various scandals, and I lose track. I can't remember. I'll forget one or two. I mean, there are that many out there. Gina, let me ask you, listen to one soundbite. This is clip number 4, Rob. This is Edward Snowden. He's the guy that blew the whistle on the NSA domestic surveillance. And here's what he says is the hazard of just the sheer volume of records that have been collected by the NSA. Let's listen.
Because even if you're not doing anything wrong, you're being watched and recorded. And the storage capability of these systems increases every year consistently by orders of magnitude to where it's getting to the point you don't have to have done anything wrong. You simply have to eventually fall under suspicion from somebody, even by a wrong call. And then they can use the system to go back in time and scrutinize every decision you've ever made, every friend you've ever discussed something with, and attack you on that basis to sort of derive suspicion from an innocent life and paint anyone in the context of a wrongdoing.
Gina, got about 45 seconds left. Your reaction to that soundbite?
Positively terrifying. You look at the quote by Maxine Waters that said that this administration has, that Obama himself has a database like the likes of which have never been seen. She said that after the election was over the last time, and we all thought she was referring to a campaign database. Was she? The things that have been unveiled now, Brian, really are just very telling, and it's high time that Republicans call not only for the impeachment, but for the criminal prosecution of this administration.
Our guest has been Gina Loudon, host of a radio program in her own right, columnist, reporter for WND.com, and founder of the Tea Party movement. Gina, thank you for taking time to be with us and sharing your insights, and look forward to having you on again.
Always, Brian. Thank you so much. God bless your audience.
Right, God bless you. That's Dr. Gina Loudon, our guest here, a frequent guest here on AFR Talk on Focal Point. She's the host of the Dr. Gina Show and a outstanding talk show host in her own right. So anyway, and I'm looking at this memo from the 624th Operations Center, and it says these classified documents, NSA documents, are readily available on the internet. I mean, that means by definition they ain't classified no more. They're out there on the internet. And so apparently the Air Force wants their people to be less informed than the people they are responsible to protect. Focal Point, AFR Talk.